what AI has done has lowered the barrier to creating average content.
You're trying to create those points of difference as opposed to keep on just lobbing information time and time and time again into the buying group.
So one of the levers you can pull, which I believe very firmly is thought leadership.
B2B marketing for the last 12 to 18 months has been about the commercial marketeer. And that for me is a great example of thought leadership. Welcome back to Soapbox, the podcast where we share practical insights from industry experts on the pressing issues around achieving B2B business growth. I'm Charlotte, CEO here at Ice Blue Sky. Today I'm joined by Joel and Graham, and we're going to talk about to trust or not to trust. As I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the issue of trust, particularly obviously in the world of B2B marketing, because that is our world. So Joel, why don't you do a quick little intro, because I think you'll introduce yourself much better than I will, and then maybe just give us a little bit of an overview as to why you think trust is becoming such a big issue and more of an issue than it has been previously.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me to be part of this today. My name is Joel Harrison. I'm one of the founders of B2BMarketing.net, which was many years ago launched as B2B Marketing Magazine in those pre-digital days.
I remember it well.
Yeah, when we used to wait monthly for information and it was serendipity, what you found and what you didn't find in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm very nostalgic for those days. But the business has moved on a lot in that time, and now it's focused around an insight platform called Propolis, and we had the B2B Marketing Awards and B2B Marketing Ignite and the ABM conference and much else besides. So, but these days I've stepped back from that. I'm no longer operationally involved in the business, so I'm still one of the owners of it. I've actually embarked on a career of being a kind of content creator, podcaster myself, influencer, if I can say that without feeling a little bit sick.
Without pouting.
Yeah.
I think it's great you're owning up to it. I really think it's great.
It's like a self-help session. I'm Joel, I'm an influencer.
It really is. It's one of those things I don't very kind of admit with trepidation, but it's the least worst word to describe what it is that I do. So I'm doing that and really enjoying it, and just getting back to actually more like being what I was doing 20 years ago, being a content creator and being an editor and being able to find the stories and find the personalities, but leveraging 20 years of experience, and also being in an industry which is very mature now, which it wasn't 20 years ago, which is much better for everybody.
Definitely.
And then you also asked me then to talk about trust.
Yes.
Why is trust important right now? Well, trust has always been important. Let's not try and pretend otherwise, right?
That's very true.
It's critical when you're buying something from anybody. And it's critical in B2B, particularly given the considered natures of the purchase for true B2B, complex B2B. But it's become much more important for a few reasons quite recently. First of all, the best illustration of this is there is a kind of macroeconomic societal trust challenge, and it's brilliantly illustrated in the Edelman Trust Barometer report, which is something they've been doing for 25 years, a piece of content, and they've tracked the evolution of trust across all the major markets in the world, actually most of the major countries in the world, not just the major markets, and they've demonstrated how trends have come and gone, and they launched it every year at Davos. It kind of describes to you kind of the seriousness of which they're kind of pitching it. And this year, what they showed is there's what they're calling it the real trust crisis, and it's kind of encapsulation of a disconnect and a sense of disenfranchisement across society, in particular socioeconomic groups, which is being fueled. It is cause and consequence of the populist politicians who are seeking to have quite divisive narratives. Polarizations.
Which social media exacerbates.
People don't feel they have a stake in society anymore, and they're cynical about major institutions, government, NGOs, business, and media. So there's a wider big issue which percolates down across society and into business as well. Actually, business is of the four areas least affected, but it's still affected, and there's a general sense of cynicism about the establishment. So that's a macro issue, and the certain politicians are kind of keen on deriding evidence and experts. And so that creates a sense of, you can create your own narrative. You can basically choose your reality from a menu, essentially. You don't have to listen to experts despite what they've got to say, or you're not perceived to have to. So that's the first thing. The second thing, then going in hand with that, we've seen, and actually back to the point at the start, you talked about B2B Marketing Magazine.
Yeah.
Magazine's gone. Magazines across the board have much diminished, often completely gone altogether. And actually the brands that went with them are much diminished in terms of the numbers, in terms of their sense of importance in markets and categories.
And their credibility and objectivity.
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that they've lacked. They let their standards diminish. I wouldn't necessarily want to say that, but there's just less of them. They're less. They're not the only sources. They've been challenged in terms of their business models. Some of them have gone under. There's some amazing old school established publications that have gone for hundreds of years, have closed in the last 5 years or so, or been sold by their owners. And
I was in Covent Garden recently and walked past where you remember the magazine The Lady?
Oh yeah,
the offices in Covent Garden. The building is now getting very dilapidated, and I thought, gosh, such an indictment as to the change.
It's a massive change in our times. Things like Lloyd's List is a really good example of that. Something that's been going since the 1700s, came out of the coffee houses in the City of London. And I don't think it's closed down, but it's been sold to a much more smaller publisher. Estates Gazette's another really, really powerful publication. So all of these brands have become less significant and important and trusted go-to sources of information because of the nature of information consumption, because of the fact that there's so much other content around. There's so many different distribution channels. There's so much noise. We're confronted with thousands of messages, hundreds and thousands of messages every day. It's difficult to know where to look. So those kind of like those pillars of trust are no longer what they were, even if they're still striving to achieve the same standards that they were. And
it's a good point because, Graham, obviously your background is print.
Yes, it is.
A lot of it is involved in print. So I think there's a nice sort of segue here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking that. So for those of you who've just come onto one of our podcasts, I'm Graham. I'm one of the directors here at Ice Blue Sky. But I was just thinking as you were talking the job, print is recognised to be a real trusted form of communication. And it always has been. So when you read it, you believe it. And I think to your point now, we're overexposed. We have so many channels of consumption. And we question, don't we? We question what is real, what is authentic, what is truthful. And so the brands that really put a lot of effort into that to be seen to the trusted provider of that content. But tell me, what are you seeing? I mean, are they putting so much more effort and money into that to rise above the noise of the content from everybody else? Are you seeing that? So people are rising to be that trusted contributor, or is it? I don't know.
Well, I think there are some brands which still have maintained their position in the market, and I think the two that leaped, in particular, kind of not business publications, but actually a couple of them are. The FT is an obvious example of that, right? That has maintained its editorial standards and is commercially doing extremely well. The Economist is another one. So those ones, because of they've got a very broad scope in terms of their coverage. In terms of other areas, I think there are less in terms of the IT press, for example, isn't what it was. There are probably more sources of information, but they have the authority that they used to have. And does it mean that, I guess is the question, do you have to be in print to be authoritative? No, but at the same time, there's something about the business model and something about the kind of positioning and the way of operating that applies and kind of seems to kind of attract that level of authority, which I don't think is quite there anymore.
And it's not only just for people that have got publications, it's the trust of how brands are taking themselves into the marketplace and the trust of that as well.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that starts to tease into my things about solutions, but brands are creating their own content in varying degrees of quality, and we can talk about that.
We need to. Yeah.
I don't know if we've got enough time.
Well, yeah, how long have we got exactly? But the third, so that's the two sources. The first is this kind of disenfranchisement. The second one is changes in information consumption and authority within media. And the third one, hey, you guessed it, we haven't talked about it for 20 minutes, it's AI. Because AI is everywhere. And what AI has done has lowered the barrier to creating average content. And that looks good, and that looks good kind of aesthetically and looks credible
at first glance.
But we know a lot of it isn't. So everyone's churning out average to good content, and that's lowering the bar and creating more noise, and distracting from the stuff that is generally good. And sometimes they put more money into the distribution of the content than they might have the creation of the content in the first place. And then overlaid on top of that, you have things like avatars. Who do you trust? That visual version of who you see. You have geo creating a big issue, generative engine optimization, which is surfing the web. We're all doing searches on ChatGPT, etc. consuming information in different ways. So it's really creating a challenge in terms of who we trust, what we trust, people, and it's the information landscape has been upended. So trust always was important. It's become a lot more important.
Definitely, and I think you said something when you were talking about The Economist and the FT, where you said they've survived in the way that they have because they've maintained editorial standards. And I think that is such a key thing, because we were talking about this, weren't we, in prep for today?
Yeah.
You know, it's not just, and I know you talk about thought leadership, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but I think you raised a really good point in the prep for this yesterday, which was around, it's about original thought, and in like the FT and the Economist, they're still good at that investigative journalism and, you know, getting the story, and that I think it's tempting to lose it with this proliferation of content.
That's human, isn't it? If we think about it.
It's interesting. It's interesting to read.
So what do we want to read? Do we want to read something that's been generated by a machine, or it has come from original thought?
It's just a rehash of opinions.
And perspective. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of rehashing going on. I guess those publications have got to, they live and die on their editorial quality and integrity and all those things. I don't think the publications, I think it'd be erroneous to say that many of the really reputable B2B publications that went digital have less editorial standards. I certainly wouldn't say that B2B Marketing lost editorial standards. What it did do
definitely not.
It made you produce different kinds of content, and it made you work with sponsors in a different way than you might have done before. There wasn't often a clear barrier between editorial and advertising the way that might have been. And in some ways that's okay, but there's a temptation for it not to be okay. And just generally just chipping away at the barriers of what you might do. And I don't know what's pragmatic and what's prostitution, you know.
I think when you can demonstrate source. So some of the content, we talk about B2B marketing, if you can demonstrate source or where that content is coming from, so the authenticity of that. So if it's somebody in the room, someone talking directly, whereas previously you didn't have that so much, or you might have had a quote from somebody and you could never really quantify whether they've actually said that or not. So when we've got this type of medium, when we're doing this and having someone in the room that's actually talking about it, well, okay, yeah, you trust that.
Although, am I here? Am I an avatar?
I was just talking about pinch you.
Yeah, let's talk about thought leadership, because it's an overused term rather, and it's been around for a long time now. So how do you sort of see that in this world of trust, and how you bring all that together?
Well, I think the first thing, just to take a half step back, you know, your brand is a key. It's fundamental to trust, right? It's what people recognize as you, and a summation of all. I define it as the summation of all of the touch points and the experiences that you've had as a consumer. So building a brand is critical, but to build, you can't advertise your way out of a trust issue, right?
No,
You've got
definitely.
to do, or as much, you have to spend a lot of money, and it's quite expensive to do that. So one of the levers you can pull, which I believe very firmly, is thought leadership. And I totally agree with you. It's been around a long time, although not as long as some things. I mean, I recently spoke to an author in the States who thinks it's been around since the 1970s, which is longer than I thought it would have been. But it's misused. And people apply it to a lot of things, and often there's two primary areas of where I think it's misused or misapplied. One is it's misconstrued with content marketing. And so what's the difference, you may be asking, between, in my opinion, between content marketing and thought leadership? Well, it's got to be original. It's got to be leading, and it's
clues in the name.
Yeah, clues in the name. Have you had some thoughts, and are they leading? Is a good starting point. But essential to that, or I think essential to that, is actually, is it based on real data? Either research or data in terms of behaviours of people or customers or something. So if you've got those two things, well, that's a good starting point in terms of that differentiates it from content marketing. And it's typically content marketing is typically orientated around the middle of the funnel. It's around generating demand or generating leads. Whereas, and thought leadership can have an application in that regard, but actually great thought leadership, in my opinion, applies throughout the funnel. It definitely has a very, very strong component about it at brand level, at positioning level, at awareness level, all of those kind of things. And actually, the best thought leadership is campaigns that are that run across all three and are big ideas that are deployed in multiple ways over a long period of time because they're strong ideas. They're not tactical marketing. They're very strategic bits of marketing.
Yeah, it's just not that one-off white paper with a few sort of smaller pieces wrapped around it.
Exactly.
It's actually a key thread throughout a 12-month program, for example.
Well, someone said, we were at our B2B symposium last week. Somebody says, does anybody read white papers anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, they actually put that question out into where everybody thinks they're must, but actually, when was the last time you read a white paper?
Well, and what is a white paper? Because they used to be very different.
Yeah, absolutely.
When did your bot last use it?
Yes. The bots are reading them.
The bots are reading them.
Yeah, they
I can
are.
guarantee that. But one other distinction just worth making at this point actually is that what often gets called thought leadership is a random blog.
Yes.
An isolated blog on a particular topic. Now, that's more relevant in certain topics like legal industry, for example, because they've got to put a blog out and talk about a legal change. That makes sense. But I don't think it's thought leadership.
It's content marketing.
It's content, right? Or it's good. For me, it has to be strategic and it has to be joined up and it has to be based on actual data.
Yeah.
And if that works for you as a legal firm, then great. But I don't think it's not thought leadership in the grandest sense.
I agree, and I think also it's joining the dots with not just the thought, but actually, okay, how do you put that into practice?
Yeah.
How do you make that within the DNA of whatever it is that you're talking about that you do, creating that mindset shift into whatever that topic is? You like B2B marketing for the last 12 to 18 months has been about the commercial marketeer. And that for me is a great example of thought leadership.
And we're actually, as a business, Richie, the CEO, is presenting at Ignite next week, and this may come out after that, but really trying to bring that topic alive, and through a protracted program, which I've been pushing them to do. So really exciting to see that come to life.
It is, and I love it because I'm always banging on about, MQLs shouldn't matter outside of the marketing team. It should be about marketing attributed pipeline. And that's the commercial conversation. There are elements that come off that, but so just as an aside, don't get me started.
Don't get us started.
How long have we got?
we had a conversation earlier, and I was on the tube this morning, and obviously we spoke yesterday about this podcast, and I'm standing opposite this advert by Adobe this morning, and all of a sudden I saw the word trust in one of the lines, and I suppose it had not set off any alarm bells before, but I thought, isn't that interesting that they're bringing that actually the content and the creation that Adobe is giving you will be trusted. And they had a little bit of a dig towards Canva, and they were almost like suggesting that may not be as trusted as Adobe is. So
it was an interesting take. Wasn't
it is, yes. Well, maybe we'll put a screen grab of that ad. I've got a picture of it, but we'll put a screen grab of that in this podcast. But I just thought it was interesting because I was sort of read the ads, and that word just pinged out at me.
Yeah, I think it was the only way you've got a technology that's using AI an awful lot, just to chip away and say, to imply lack of trust in your competitors. Seems interesting.
Yeah, because as much as it builds up over here, it can really denigrate another brand over there. So we joked about influencer marketing at the beginning, but talk about that, because I think that's a term that's often misunderstood within B2B, because we all know what it is in consumer marketing. But talk about that for a bit.
It's massively misunderstood, and I've started describing myself as an influencer simply because there isn't really a better word to describe it. But that's, I think, what we know what an influencer is in B2C, as you say. It's someone who is on camera putting on makeup, or running shoes, or a car, or something like that. These extrovert individuals who are got enormous social media profiles, and I spent the last 15 years people saying, oh, influence is going to break through in B2B this year. It never happens. Actually, 2 years ago it started to happen. And I think for me, the reason for that was that Ogilvy actually did a really good job of redefining what that is. Maybe everyone else regarded this already. I didn't, but they kind of basically said the influencer ecosystem is anybody who can have an influence. It's not necessarily. It could be someone who makes their living out of professionally promoting brands, but it's probably more likely to be people like journalists, for example, or analysts, or thought leaders in an organization, or employees. And there are other people in that mix, but those are the kind of the main ones.
Customer advocacy.
Which is a critical part of it. So all of those people have an influencer are influencers but have to be deployed in different ways.
Yeah.
And so that for me, that was a penny drop moment, right? Okay, I probably have always been an influencer. I've described myself as such. And actually, being a bit meta for a second about this, being stepping back from B2B marketing and having, I'm operating in a kind of post-magazine world, because it's actually about, I've always strived to be a trusted voice, but within the context of a brand. Now I'm kind of stepping back outside of that brand and being a trusted voice as an individual. And I'm not the only former recovering print journalist doing that. I think there are others, but I myself am doing that, and it's a fascinating journey.
It is, and it's so relevant because, circling back to what we were saying at the beginning, that is a big form of trust building. When you've got someone objective coming in and talking about specific brands, which is you mentioned the tech press a while ago. I mean, I remember nearly 30 years ago, Computer Weekly and PC Magazine, and looking through those and they're doing the kind of witch style comparisons between products and technologies, and a lot of that's gone, and the disconnect between people buying tech, and I talk about tech because that's where we specialize, but the disconnect between people buying technology and people selling technology, you talked about polarisation, that gap is just getting bigger and bigger. And I think personally, that people like yourself are going to play an even larger role than before, because to help fill that gap and to help guide people through.
I think that's exactly right. I think that in the 20 years ago, I couldn't have set up as an influencer in B2B marketing as if there was an industry there, which there kind of wasn't really 20 years ago. But now you can actually do that because of the techniques. And that's the other thing as well. There is, yes, of course, we have we have all these platforms, LinkedIn and Instagram and all those, and X, if anyone's still there. But
Tumbleweed.
Exactly, Tumbleweed and other less desirable things.
Yeah.
But the other thing, as well as a redefinition in some people's minds, another thing that's made a difference at influencer marketing is the tools become available.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give LinkedIn any kudos, but LinkedIn created something called thought leader ads. It's really influencer ads, but they're not, because it's not, you don't have to be a thought leader to advertise there, but it's able to amplify an individual's message. And that's a powerful thing. That's generating a lot of revenue for them. A lot of people are using it, and it's very successful. And then also around that, then you have other tools developing and ecosystems in terms of people enabling you to find and identify influencers in B2B, which you could never do before.
Yeah.
So it's gaining momentum for that reason as well. And I think that's what's going to cement it as something marketers can do.
And we see that, Joel. We see about trying to influence, from our perspective when we're working, how to influence the buying group, and how do you enable, how do you facilitate, how do you enroll those almost influencers within that buying journey.
Yes.
And enable them to then take the baton and to be that voice internally. And how do they share that information? And I think for us, in that sort of buying group marketing sort of strategy, that's a big thing for us now. Because you're trying to create those points of difference, as opposed to keep on just lobbing information time and time and time again into the buying group. And almost you become annoying because everybody's doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's enabling influence and advocacy, which is kind of another different dimension. These words have, there's Venn diagrams, aren't they? They overlap.
Yeah, I think customer advocacy is something that is really going to come into the fore. I mean, we had our B2B symposium last week, as Graham mentioned, and we had some people from a company called Trusted, who have just launched and who specialise in they've got a platform for customer advocacy.
It's Emma Roffey, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So
the same thing is, so for me, the three pillars of trust are thought leadership, influence, and advocacy.
Yeah.
And this exactly in the same way as there's an ecosystem developing around influence, there's also an ecosystem developing around advocacy. And Trust is a great example of that. There's also B2B Stars, which is a spin-off of Expandy Group. And there's another company which is in a kind of a pre-start state at the moment, which I'm part of an advisory group for. There are various others as well. I did a bit of it. I was a slide showing all the different companies that are playing in this space, and it's fascinating. The challenge with advocacy is that, you know, people think it's just customer success, you know, which is a very powerful function. It's everyone knows the power of great case studies, great advocacy, but at the same time, it's always done as an afterthought.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's never done strategically or consistently or truly leveraging the
it's
power
often
of it.
one of the first things to get cut when things get tight.
And one of the things from the session from Trusted, I suppose, they were talking about what we call in-deal advocacy, and they were saying, well, while you're in deal or when you're coming to the close of the deal, no better time to then get advocacy and people talking about it.
Yeah.
So before you've even signed the contract or you've started to work, what does that look like? And I as a takeaway for me, because I really sort of was interested in that.
I loved how they articulated it, because they
did really well.
got across the commercial value
Yes.
of advocacy. And I think often that's the message that's missed, because I think it's not been a specific discipline where independent companies like that have championed for it.
Yeah.
Whereas the fact that that's happening now.
Yeah, and when you're in the moment, and when you're in the moment of that, and you're feeling like how you've been sold to, onboarded, and if that you're getting really great experience, you know, 3 months down the line, you're not going to feel that emotion as much, maybe, but in the moment you will.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. I mean, it takes the right infrastructure and the right players to enable that, but it is a tremendously powerful thing. You know, it's so intangible, but it's so powerful, and it goes, you know, it's beyond that. It's into bringing people together as customers afterwards and bringing them close. You know, it's part of a general sense of customer centricity, which we've talked about in B2B for years, but we've only got so far with that, I think.
I was going to say, I almost described it as sort of that marginal gain.
Yeah.
That 2% that can give you that success.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think like most of these, we could probably go on and talk about this for quite a long time, especially advocacy, I think, and thought leadership. They're both enormous topics. But thanks for coming along, Joel. It's been a really good conversation, and I think we might need a part 2.
Well, I'm always happy to do that, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
it's been
good to have you along.
Thanks for coming along. It was a great chat. Thank you.